He ruled most of Europe, but one winter destroyed everything. Cannons roared, horses screamed, flags snapped in the wind. Across Europe, kings fell one by one. Napoleon Bonaparte, the small man in the black hat, moved faster than anyone thought possible. Italy, Austria, Prussia. Again and again, armies lined up to stop him. Again and again, they broke. He was not born a king. He took power with speed, brains, and pure nerve. In France, after revolution and chaos, people wanted order. Napoleon gave it to them. He rose from soldier to general to ruler, then crowned himself emperor with his own hands. Not a servant of destiny, its master. He changed laws, he rebuilt schools, he made France stronger. But power like that is never enough. Every win made the next win feel small. Every border looked temporary. Every rival looked like a problem to crush. And Europe feared him for a reason. At Austerlitz, his masterpiece, the sun cut through the morning mist as his enemies walked into a trap. He looked weak. That was the trick. Then he struck, fast, hard, clean. The Russian and Austrian armies collapsed. Men ran across frozen lakes as cannons blasted the ice beneath them. It was not just a victory, it was a warning. Do not challenge Napoleon. But one enemy would not stay down. Britain ruled the seas, and Napoleon could not break it. So he tried to choke it instead. He built a giant blockade, ordering Europe to stop trading with the British. If he could not beat them with ships, he would starve them with rules. But rules are weak when fear fades. Russia began to pull away. Tsar Alexander I had once met Napoleon as an equal, almost as a friend. That did not last. The alliance cracked. Trade reopened, pride hardened. Two emperors stared at each other across a continent, and neither wanted to blink first. Napoleon made his choice. In 1812, he gathered the largest army Europe had ever seen. More than 500,000 men. French troops, yes, but also Poles, Germans, Italians, Dutch, a moving empire of steel, mud, drums, and hunger. They crossed into Russia, expecting one giant battle that would end everything. But the Russians kept retreating. Village after village stood empty. Wells were spoiled, fields were burned. Smoke rose from farms before the French could reach them. There was no grand surrender, no easy victory, just miles, dust, heat, then more miles. Napoleon kept pushing, because turning back would look weak. That was his ghost. Not death, not defeat, humiliation. Finally, near Borodino, Russia turned and fought. It was slaughter. Cannon smoke swallowed the field. Men vanished in black blasts of dirt and blood. Lines crashed into each other and disappeared. By nightfall, tens of thousands were dead or dying. Napoleon had the field, but not the victory he needed. The Russian army was hurt, not broken. It pulled away again. Napoleon marched on Moscow. He expected the city to kneel before him, to hand him peace, like a key placed in his palm. Instead, he entered a ghost city, empty streets, shuttered homes, strange silence. Then came the fire. Moscow burned. Orange flames climbed into the sky. Roofs cracked, windows burst. Smoke rolled through the city in thick black waves. Napoleon stood in the middle of the prize he had chased across a continent and watched it turn to ash. He had won nothing. Still, he waited. A day, then another, then weeks. No surrender came. That was the pivot. Not a battle, not a sword. Silence. The Tsar would not beg. Now the cold arrived. At first it bit, then it tore. The air turned sharp as broken glass. Horses froze where they stood. Men wrapped rags around their feet and still lost their toes. Food vanished. Discipline cracked. The great army that had entered Russia like a storm began leaving it like a funeral. Then winter truly opened its jaws. Snow swallowed the roads. Wagons broke. Guns were abandoned in the ice. Hungry soldiers clawed through frozen ground for scraps. Some fell asleep in the white fields and never stood again. Cossacks circled like wolves, striking the weak edges, cutting down stragglers, vanishing into the storm. Marshal Ney fought like a man made of iron, dragging survivors through smoke and snow. Napoleon rode with them, but now the emperor looked smaller, not because of his height, because the world had stopped bending. At the Berezina River, the nightmare became complete. The army reached icy water, with enemies closing in. Bridges had to be built under fire. Men shoved forward in panic. Cannons crashed into the river. Horses screamed. Wounded soldiers begged not to be left behind. Some were trampled. Some slipped under the black water. Some burned as the bridges caught fire. The empire was crossing over its own grave. By the time the survivors crawled out of Russia, the Grand Army was shattered. The force that entered with more than 500,000 came back as a broken shadow. Europe saw it, and once Europe saw Napoleon bleed, Europe attacked. Prussia rose. Austria turned. Russia kept coming. The old fear cracked apart. Napoleon still fought like a genius. Even cornered, he moved fast, hitting hard, pulling wins from impossible ground. But now, every victory cost too much, and every loss opened a wider hole. He had built his throne on motion. Once the motion stopped, the whole thing shook. Then it fell. Paris was taken. Napoleon abdicated. The emperor, who had crowned himself master of Europe, was sent away to Elba, a tiny island prison. For a moment, it seemed over. But men like Napoleon do not end quietly. He escaped. He returned to France, and soldiers sent to arrest him joined him instead. For one last burst, the old magic came back. The 100 days, one final gamble, one final march toward destiny. Then Waterloo, and this time, destiny said no. After that, there was no comeback left. He was shipped far away to St. Helena, a lonely island in the South Atlantic. No cheering crowds, no marching bands, no empire, just wind, rock, and memory. The man who had once made kings shake now walked under a gray sky at the edge of the world. He had conquered nations. He had redrawn maps. He had made Europe feel small under his boots, but he could not conquer his own hunger for more. That was the trap. Not Russia alone, not winter alone. The need to keep going when stopping was the wiser move. In the end, the snow did not just kill his army. It exposed him. A man brilliant enough to seize a continent, but too proud to know when he had enough. And far from the battle drums, far from the fire, the emperor who once held Europe in his fist was left with the coldest loss of all. He had beaten almost everyone else, but never himself. If you want more stories like this, like, comment, share, and subscribe.